Hello, Hill Science 4502 students. This is your week 13 part A video in regard to fire extinguisher training. Fairly important, something that hopefully a lot of you have had experience with but understand. Uh, this is definitely something, I've worked in occupational settings for pretty close to 35 years, and I've never used a fire extinguisher. That's not to be said that I've never seen one used. I've definitely worked, we had an incident last year where a vehicle started a brush fire because a bunch of brush got built up underneath it, and it combusted because of the position of the muffler and how the muffler was packed with materials. So I have seen fire extinguishers used, just never have had a chance to use one myself. Now I have practiced, and I do encourage you, if you ever get an opportunity to practice with a fire extinguisher, I encourage you to do so. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Slide 1 is the fire extinguisher slide. Shows A, B, C, and D fire types, but we'll definitely get more into that here. Slide number 2 is the objectives that we're going to talk about tonight. I want you to understand the combustion process and the different classes of fires, but also to understand the different extinguisher types, operating procedures, capabilities, limitations, and then we're going to talk about some basic firefighting concepts, the race concept and the pass concept. And so these are things that I really want you to be familiar with, just on the off chance that it may come up at some point if you're talking about risk assessment or managing risks at an occupational setting. Okay, so slide 3 is the combustion tetrahedron, the fire combustion process, which contains 4 different elements, which is first fuel, second is oxygen, third is temperature, and fourth is chain reaction process. So these are all very important. If you remove any of these, then the fire doesn't really have an opportunity to develop. Certainly if you remove fuel, there's nothing to burn. If you remove oxygen, it will immediately snuff out a fire. And then the temperature also has to be substantial enough for something to actually burn. And then the chain reaction process, which allows for the fire to continue to burn. This is slide 3. Slide 4 is the different fire classes. So we see a lot of different classes here, and certainly very important to understand these different fire classes. So class A is going to be like trash and wood and paper, which can include cloth, rubber materials, some plastics. And then you have B, which is a liquid style fire. It's going to include gasoline and oil, grease and tar, and oil-based paints, which are highly flammable, lacquers, which can burn flammable gases. So this is going to be that class B. And then you have class C, which is going to be energized electrical equipment. Now, obviously, like with a class C fire, a class B fire, you definitely do not want to put water on these fires for a number of reasons. A class C fire with an electrical equipment, if you dump water on it, it can very easily kill you. And then combustible metals, which is class D, includes things like magnesium, sodium, potassium, things that are metals that can potentially burst into flames. And these are definitely very dangerous fires as well. So we'll jump on to slide 5, which is a new class that was recently recognized. This is the class K style fire, and this is going to include combustibles like vegetable oil, animal non-saturated cooking fats, and these are going to be like a class K fire. You're looking at a kitchen that can potentially have a number of things that can burn, but specifically dealing with those animal fats and vegetable oils and things like that. This is a new class called the Class K fire. So on slide 6, we're looking at a fire extinguisher, the anatomy of the fire extinguisher itself. On the top, you have the discharge lever, which is going to allow the material to exit the fire extinguisher. You have below that the discharge locking pin, which you have to remove that pin in order to initiate the process of fighting a fire. You have the discharge hose, which is the black object on the left side, the discharge nozzle, which will allow for a fanning effect, the discharge orifice, which is the exit point, the pressure gauge, which is very important, that has to be inspected, should be inspected monthly but it's not found on CO2 extinguishers. It's found on general fire extinguishers, general class fire extinguishers, class A, class B, things like that, but not found on a CO2 extinguisher, and we'll talk a little bit about that. You also have below that the carrying handle, the data plate, which will have information in regard to what style extinguisher it is. It will give you some really solid information in regard to the fire extinguisher itself, and then the body itself of the fire extinguisher, which is generally going to be in red color or yellow as well. But generally, you're going to see fire extinguishers, the general fire extinguishers will be red, and that's the body color. On to slide 7. So fire extinguisher ratings. Fire extinguisher ratings are going to give you indications on what style of fire it can be used on. There's going to be a numerical value, there's going to be a fire class, and there's going to be a range that these extinguishers will work well for. So with a numerical value, direct index of the size, fire, the capacity of the agent can handle. That's going to be very important. So if you have a major fire, obviously you don't want a numerical value that's very low, and certainly you're not going to fight a good sized fire with the fire extinguisher, right? You're just going to call the fire department and they'll come out and help you out. So with a rating, if you see a rating of A, it's going to be good for trash, wood, and paper. Class B is going to be the liquids and gases. C, the electrical, D, combustible, and then that K for cooking materials. But certainly that numerical value will give you an idea of how large a fire can fight. It also gives you indications of the square footage that can be treated. So there is no numerical used based because there are no degrees of safety where electricity is concerned moving down. So this is the third box on the left side. Obviously, there's not going to be a numerical value with degrees of safety with electricity because electric fires are exceedingly dangerous. So definitely keep that in mind. With Class D, it's not applicable because of the specialized nature of the burning materials. So again, it's not going to give you a square footage. And then with Class K, it's going to have a direct index of the size fire, the quantity of the agent can handle. So as you're moving through those numerical values, you'll notice that A and B are going to give you some idea of the square footage, the size of the fire, and also K as well. But with C, with electrical fires, and D, combustible metals, you really have to be very careful with these things. And then on to slide 8, there's the fire class for application purposes. And again, this is A, B, C, D, and K. And this is going to give you an idea of what you can use for the effective extinguisher types. So with Class A, you can use pressurized water, multi-purpose dry chemical, larger halon, and wet chemical as well. So these are the different types of extinguishers that you can use. And then with Class B, with liquids and greases, obviously you're not going to want to put water on these because it'll just spread the fire. So you're going to use a multi-purpose dry chemical, which is usually going to be like a white powdery material. You can also use CO2 and halon. And then with electrical equipment, which is a Class C, you're going to want that multi-purpose dry chemical, carbon dioxide, halon, or wet chemical as well for Class C with electrical fires. But again, B's and C, they're very dangerous fires as well as Class D as well. Class D is going to be the combustible metal extinguisher type specifically. And then with Class K, the cooking media, you're going to want a wet chemical fire extinguisher. So you just kind of have a rough idea of these. Just on the off chance that you ever are exposed to a fire, if you have a liquid or grease fire, you really want to make sure that you have one of those dry multi-purpose, which is very, very common, but it's not going to respond well to water. So do keep that in mind. Class 9, which is, again, some fire extinguisher types. This is specifically a pressurized water type. This is for Class A fires only. Only Class A fires, which is trash, wood, and paper. Usually it carries about 2.5 gallons of water at about 150 psi, which is going to discharge very quickly. So you're usually going to run through all that water in about a minute. So you can imagine that you're going to have a pretty small incident with a 1 minute discharge time. It has a pressure gauge that's going to give you some visual check on how much water you actually still have in regard to PSI, pounds per square inch. And then it's usually going to have about a 30-foot maximum effective range. So it's not going to work on liquid fires. It's not going to work on electrical fires. These would be exceedingly dangerous to do, and definitely something that is never advisable that you try to fight a Class B or C fire with a water-based fire extinguisher. Can be started and stopped as necessary, and extinguishes by cooling. So that cool liquid is going to cause the fire to go out. So with trash, paper, and wood, things of that nature. On to slide 10. This is a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher type. This is Class B or C fires. It has between a 2.5 and 100 pounds of carbon dioxide gas at about 150 psi. It's going to discharge in between 8 and 30 seconds. It has no pressure gauge. It's a capacity verified by weight, so you can actually feel it getting much lighter as you're using it. It has a 3 to 8 foot maximum effective range. So if you have a fire that's over 8 feet, this is not going to cut it, and you definitely want to evacuate yourself as quickly as possible. And this extinguishes by smothering the burning materials, and its effectiveness decreases as the temperature of the burning material increases. So the higher the temperature, it's going to decrease the effectiveness of this type of fire extinguisher. So it is a good extinguisher for very small source fires that have liquid or gases that are burning. So gasoline fire, a grease fire, sorry, not gas, grease, I apologize. I was thinking gasoline. So liquid, you can use this for putting out gasoline and things like that, and also grease fires. So if you have oil that's burning, like you tip over your French fry cooker, things like that. On to slide 11. This is a multi-purpose dry chemical. This is going to work on Class A, B, C fires, but not D or K. So again, it can work for a K-style fire, but this is not going to be, well, okay. This will work well for a K-style fire, but it's not listed as a K fire extinguisher. So for the purposes of this class, I really want you to focus on A, B, and C. So it does do K because, as you can see, with K-style fires, you're going to be dealing with grease fires generally, kitchen fires, and Class B fits into that mold. So yes, it will work. A multi-purpose dry chemical will work on a K-style fire. So you can add that into this slide as well. But I don't make crazy test questions. All right, so keep that in mind. So with a multi-purpose dry chemical fire extinguisher, it carries a 2.5 to 20 pound dry chemical called ammonium phosphate. It's pressurized at between 50 and 200 psi by nitrogen gas, and it's going to discharge in 8 to 25 seconds. So it's really going to blast out a small fire, but it's not going to work for anything larger than that. And this is A, B, and C, and K. Has a pressure gauge to allow visual capacity check to see where you're running out of fluid, or I should say of the dry chemical, which is the ammonium phosphate, which is like a dry powdery material if you've ever seen that. And it's going to have about a 5 to 20 foot maximum coverage area, the effective range. And then this is going to extinguish by smothering the burning material. So it's also going to cover it and smother it, not like the water type, which is going to put it out by cooling it. So on to slide 12. This is a halon. So halon is going to work with liquid and grease and electrical equipment as well. So it's going to work very well for Class B and C, and it's really going to have a very ineffective treatment method for Class A fires. It's not going to really work all that well, but it works well for liquids and gases and electrical equipment. So it has between 9 and 17 pounds of halon. This is going to be pressurized liquid released as vapor, and it's going to have about an 8 to 18 second discharge. It does have a pressure gauge to allow for visual capacity, and it's going to have an effectiveness range between 9 and 16 feet, and works very well in confined small spaces. So say, for instance, you have a grease fire inside of a frying pan or something like that. This also works by smothering as well. It's going to smother the fire. One of the problems with the halon is that it's going to put out some toxic fumes that should not be inhaled, and it's also ozone depleting as well, so it's not ideal. And then on to slide 13, which is combustible metal. This is a Class D combustible metal fire extinguisher specific to Class D fires. It's going to have a 30-pound pressurized dry powder release, which is optimized for specific combustible metals. It's also available in bulk containers for hand scooping onto fires, so you can actually scoop this material directly onto the fire. This is going to have a 6 to 8 maximum foot effectiveness range. It's going to activate, so in order to activate it, you have to open the nitrogen cylinder on the back of the pressurized body. And this is also going to be an extinguishing style, which is going to smother the fire and the burning material. So it's actually going to cover it and smother it much like a blanket. Okay. So on to slide 14. This is going to be a wet chemical. So this is ideal for Class K fires. It works very well for A and C and K. So this is really the ideal fire extinguisher for a Class K fire. So it works with trash and wood and paper Class A, Class C electrical, and Class K for the cooking mediums. So it has a 1.5 gallon stored pressure PRX wet chemical extinguishing agent. So very interesting stuff. I'm not going to get too much into it. It discharges in about 40 seconds, so you don't have much time. And it's got about a 10 to 12 foot maximum effectiveness range. And it works very well on Class K fires. You don't really want to use this until you've fixed extinguishing systems that have activated. So you definitely want to you want to use a Class K fire extinguisher specifically after that fixed extinguishing system has activated. So what's going to happen is like a water source is going to turn on and it's going to do bad things to the fire. If you have a grease fire, it's going to start moving it around, and then you're going to use this wet chemical system to put that fire out at that point. So the Class K, the wet chemical is going to extinguish by cooling and forming a foam blanket to prevent reignition. So it's going to cover it, it's going to cool it, and then it's going to put it out. So slide 15 is a fire extinguisher summary. It gives each one of the different types of fire extinguishers and how they work and what classes they're effective against. So you'll notice that the combustible metal smothers and only works for Class D, and pressurized water only works with Class A fires as well. So on to slide 16. This is the fire emergency response. So again, the acronym for this is RACE, rescue, alarm, contain, and extinguish. So this is your order in regard to what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to rescue anybody that's in danger. You're going to sound the alarm. You're going to contain the source as best as possible, and then you will extinguish the fire. So RACE is the fire extinguisher acronym for this. And certainly not something that you're going to tend to think about during a fire. But remember, the first thing to do is get people out of harm's way. Second thing you want to do is sound the alarm. Third thing you want to do is contain the fire source. And finally, extinguish it as best as possible if you can. On to slide 17. So this is the firefighter's decision criteria. First of all, you want to know your department emergency procedures and your evacuation routes most certainly. If you need to get out of there, you need to get out of there, and you definitely want to know the evacuation routes. You want to know the locations of extinguishers in the area, and you want to know how to use them because some of them are very different, like the combustible metal fire extinguisher, as you'd seen, very different from a multi-purpose dry chemical. So third, always sound the alarm regardless of the fire size. You always want to sound that alarm. Fourth, avoid those smoky conditions that can cause you to become incapacitated. Next, ensure the area is evacuated. Make sure everybody's out and everybody's safe. Don't attempt to fight the fire unless the alarm is sounded, the fire is small and contained, you have safe egress routes, so that's going to be how you get out. The available extinguishers are rated for the size and type of the fire. So, these are decisions that you have to make very, very quickly. And if there's any doubt in your mind, you simply evacuate, okay? Because if you have an electrical fire and you're like, I'm not sure if I can spray water on this or not, don't. Don't. You will kill yourself, okay? So when in doubt, evacuate. Keep that in mind, all right? Slide 18 is the pass method, and this works very well with the fire extinguisher. You want to know this. This is definitely something that you want to know. So this is what you're going to do with a fire extinguisher, the pass method. The first thing you're going to do, P, pull the pin. It's not going to work until you pull that pin out. A, aim low at the base of the flames. Low at the base of the flames, so you're aiming at the bottom. S, squeeze the handle. S, sweep from side to side and do the very best you can. And once that fire extinguisher is completely utilized, if the fire's not out, then you evacuate. Slide 19 is a quick summary. Understand the combustion process, which is the fire tetrahedron, the classes of fires, the A, B, C, D, and K fires, types of portable fire extinguishers, their operating procedures, their capabilities and limitations, and the race and pass concept. So make sure you kind of have an understanding of these things. And as you know, I don't make my tests, I don't try to trick you up on these things. You really want to know these for your own good. So the pass method for fighting a fire with a fire extinguisher is really very important, but certainly with the race concept as well. You want to be able to know, what do I do first? Okay, should I just start fighting this fire, or should I make sure the area is clear and then sound the alarm, rescue and the alarm at that point? So you want to make sure that you have these concepts understood, that you're going to utilize the race process, that you're going to use the pass process, that these are things that will be very helpful if you have to actually fight a fire, a small fire. Okay, so slide 20, now let's go practice. I wish we could. I miss you all so much, but certainly I cannot encourage you to go grab someone's fire extinguisher and go try to put out a fire. I would not ask you to do so, so please do not do that. But again, I hope this all makes sense to you. If you don't have, if there's any of this that doesn't quite make sense to you, let me know. Containing a fire can be kind of challenging. Sometimes it's as simple as closing a door to a room. But again, when you contain that fire within a closed room, if you do decide to try to fight that fire, you have to keep in mind that the containing process will definitely make some very agitating scenarios because the smoke's going to build up very rapidly in that room. If there are good ways of containing it, like say for instance, within the confines of a wastebasket where the fire is within that wastebasket, then that is a contained fire and it allows you to put it out very easily. Closing a door to a room is kind of a worst case scenario for a fire, simply because of the fact that it's going to build up a lot of smoke and a lot of heat in a hurry. So don't close yourself in to a room with a fire when it comes to containing a fire. Okay, the fire should be contained. If it's not contained, then you evacuate. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is the first video for week 13. I also have the lockout tagout video, which I'm going to put together for you here briefly, and then I will load these to the system. Keep up the great work. Everyone's doing a wonderful job on their lab reports, but make sure that you're working on your papers as well. Don't put those off to the last minute. Make sure that you're ready for those papers and your presentations as well. Okay, so with that, I will conclude the video for fire extinguishers, and then I will do the lockout tagout.